Am I the asshole for refusing to comfort my friends after they mocked my depression? I was the one who always answered first, the one who checked the group chat when somebody was crying at 2 a.m., the one who remembered birthdays, the one who noticed when Tasha went quiet, or when Lena sounded off in her voice notes, the one who said, "Are you okay?" before anyone even had to ask me. That was just me. I thought that was what being a good friend meant. You show up, you listen, you keep people from falling apart if you can. So I did it. I did it when I was tired, when I was studying, when my head felt like it was packed with wet sand, when I had my own problems sitting on my chest like a brick. I kept showing up anyway. I didn't want to be the kind of person who disappeared when things got hard. Then my depression got bad enough that I started missing class, sleeping too much, and going quiet in ways I couldn't really hide anymore. I was still trying to hold it together, but apparently I wasn't doing a great job of looking normal. And that's when they started making jokes. Small ones at first. Grace is in her cave again. Tell us when the cloud passes. They laughed like it was nothing. Like I was being dramatic. I laughed too, because what else was I supposed to do? Seriously. I was sitting right there. I heard every word. The worst part was that I didn't even explode right away. I kept telling myself they didn't mean harm, that maybe they were just awkward around serious stuff, that if I stayed calm, it would pass. But it didn't pass. It got worse. One day, Lena said I was too sensitive lately because I didn't want to come out. And Tasha actually repeated one of my own texts in this exaggerated, sad voice while everyone laughed. I remember staring at my phone after that, completely still, like my body had left the room, and only my face was left behind to do the pretending. I felt stupid. I felt small. I felt like every time I had stayed up with them, every time I talked them through a breakup, or sat with them in silence when they couldn't breathe, I had been handing pieces of myself over to people who thought my pain was entertainment. And here is the thing, I didn't ask them to fix me. I didn't ask for a speech. I didn't need them to become therapists. I just wanted them to stop making me the punchline. Then my relationship fell apart on top of it. Ethan hated how much I pulled back. He said I was distant, cold, impossible to reach. He asked why I wasn't being supportive when Tasha was upset about her own stuff, like I still owed everybody full access to me, even while I was drowning. I tried explaining it. I really did. I told him I was hurt, that my friends had mocked my depression, that I couldn't keep being the emotional pillow for people who wouldn't even take my pain seriously. He looked at me like I was making excuses, like I'd built some drama around a joke. We fought about it for days. Then he said maybe I was shutting people out because I liked being a victim. That one hit hard, real hard. After that, I stopped crying in front of him. Then I stopped crying at all, at least where anyone could see. So I pulled back, completely. No more checking in first. No more long messages. No more, how are you really doing? When I already knew I'd get a one-word answer and an eye roll later. When Tasha asked me why I had gone so quiet, I told her the truth. I said I wasn't going to keep comforting people who mocked me when I was the one in pain. She got defensive instantly. Lena said I was weaponizing my mental health, which was such a weird thing to hear that I almost laughed. Almost. They said I was being cold, that real friends don't keep score, that I was punishing everyone for one bad moment. One bad moment. Boom. That was their version, not a pattern, not weeks of comments, not the way I had smiled through it while feeling myself go numb. Just one bad moment, apparently. And because I didn't rush back to soothe them after they hurt me, they acted like I had betrayed them. I won't lie, I still hate how it ended. I hate the silence now. I hate that our photos are still on my phone and I can't look at them without feeling sick. I hate that Ethan told people I was impossible to talk to, like I'm some kind of cold statue instead of a girl who cried in bathroom stalls and still made sure everybody else got home safe. But I also hate the version of me that kept begging to be treated gently. I hate that version even more. She kept thinking if she just loved harder, if she just explained better, if she just stayed useful enough, then people would stop hurting her. They didn't. They just got used to it. Maybe that's why I'm stuck now. Because part of me thinks I should have swallowed it and been the bigger person and kept the peace. That's what everybody keeps implying. But I don't know how to call it peace when I was the only one getting cut. I don't know how to call it friendship when I had to accept being mocked in order to keep my place. I do know that after I stopped comforting them, nobody asked how I was doing. Not really. They asked why I had changed. They asked why I was being difficult. They asked why I couldn't just move on. Nobody asked whether I was okay after being laughed at for being depressed. Nobody asked whether I was okay after hearing the person I loved say I liked being a victim. Nobody asked because they didn't want the answer. They wanted me back in my old role. Easy, available, soft, useful. And maybe that's the part I can't forgive. Not even the jokes. Not even the breakup. It's the way everyone acted like my refusal to keep pouring love into people who were making a joke out of my pain was somehow cruel. Maybe it was messy. Maybe it was ugly. But it was mine. It was the first time I stopped handing out comfort just because someone expected it from me. It was the first time I looked at my own hurt and said, "No, I'm not going to step over this just to make you feel better." That didn't make me happy. It didn't make me strong in some inspiring way. It just made me tired. Empty, really. But it was honest. And honestly, I'm still not sure whether that makes me the asshole or just the person who finally got tired of being everybody's emotional cleanup crew. I found out my best friend was pretending to be the only one who understood my depression. I knew something was off the night Lena laughed at my jokes, and Tasha clapped like she just watched a show. And I said nothing because I wanted to believe it was just me being tired. But then I heard my own words leave her mouth in the canteen the next week, and it hit me like cold water. She was repeating the way I explained how I couldn't get out of bed. The little lines, I used to make people understand without crying. And she said them like she owned them. And people nodded like it was clever. And I sat down hard and pretended to scroll my phone. I'd always been the one who carried feelings home, the one who noticed when Micah's shoes were untied, or when Aunt Brenda pretended okay. And Tasha knew that. She'd been there the nights I texted, the hours she sat on my floor, while I tried to explain why breathing felt heavy. And that is why when she started making jokes about my breakdowns later, I froze, because jokes like that had been the things I'd trusted her to protect me from, not the things she'd toss back at me when other people were around. So I started watching, not in a dramatic way. I'm not that person, but quietly, like checking a light switch that kept flickering. I read the messages she left on my voice notes and compared them to the ones she sent Lena. And there were phrases that matched exactly, down to the tired little metaphors about storms and black dogs. And I remembered telling her those late at night, the way I'd said, it's like waking up underwater. And then in the hallway she'd say, it's like waking up underwater, right? With other people leaning in. That repetition felt like theft. At school, she only cried with me when someone else was nearby. She comforted me with volume, with gestures made to be seen. And then, later, she'd mimic the same small details in her stories over lunch and get pats on the back. I kept telling myself maybe she was trying to help me by translating my words for other people. But the jokes started sly comments about how dramatic I'd been when a teacher asked about absenteeism. A laugh about how I went on a whole existential tangent at last month's study group. And they stung because those were private hurts given to strangers for easy applause. I knew that people sometimes don't know what to do with pain. I also knew how much I'd poured into her. So one Sunday, when Micah was at his friend S and Aunt Brenda had gone to work, and the house smelled like tea, I opened her WhatsApp on my phone when she left it unlocked on my bed. And I read through conversations like a detective with no badge. And I felt guilty the whole time. But guilt felt smaller than the ache of being performed. I saw messages where she'd told Lena about the meltdown I'd had in class, written the same private lines I'd whispered at 2 a.m., and added little stage directions. I held her hand, or I made sure she laughed after, as if credit mattered more than truth. I saw screenshots of our late-night calls shared with the group, a voice note I'd sent in the middle of a panic that she'd forwarded with a wry, classic Amina reaction. And I wanted to vomit and laugh at the same time because it was so grotesque. Confrontation felt inevitable because I couldn't keep holding space for people who used my pain for brownie points. And the first time I brought it up to her, I tried to be soft. I said, Tash, I know you care, but I heard you repeating things I told you. And she blinked like she'd been caught practicing lines for an audition and said, oh, babe, I only said that so they'd understand you. She put her palm over mine like she was sealing a promise, and I wanted to believe her. But when I asked why she'd sent my voice note to the chat, she laughed and said, it was funny. We were all tired, and the laugh was a shield. Her eyes slid away. My throat closed. I started saying the things I'd rehearsed in my head, slow and steady, and I watched her shrink and then switch to offense like a television actor changing costume. "You're being dramatic," she said. "You're blowing this up." That line cracked everything open because it was exactly the same thing other people used to say when they wanted to walk away. I left that afternoon feeling numb, and the group noticed, of course. Tasha was all warmth and explanations around everyone else, and I felt like a photograph where someone had smeared the face out and kept the frame. The truth spread the way secrets do when you don't want them to. Quietly, unevenly, and with people taking sides, not because they understood, but because attachments are messy. Lena texted me asking if I was okay, and I sent back, "No." And then the long message. Some people believed me right away because they'd seen what I'd been like lately. Others called me jealous or unstable, and some of those voices were the ones I expected to support me. The painful human thing was that a lot of my friends loved Tasha's version of events because it made for a simpler story. She was the selfless friend who'd covered for me, who'd spun my sadness into a neat narrative with her at the center. They wanted her to be good because being wrong felt worse than being betrayed. That made protecting myself complicated. There was always a cost to choosing me. I started going to Ms. Naidu after school because teacher offices have the kind of neutral light that makes things feel possible. And I learned to say the word betrayal out loud to someone who'd been trained to listen and not perform, and it helped. I stopped sharing the small, intimate details with Tasha and found other places to put them. Micah, who hugged me and said, "I got you, sis," and didn't misunderstand what sadness looked like, and Grandma Rose, who made tea and said nothing fancy, just sat with me. The group fractured the way a brittle branch does. Some people stayed, some left, and Tasha oscillated between apology and theatrical sorrow for public sympathy. The worst was how often she used my pain like a currency at gatherings, dropping the hard parts she'd learned from me in conversations like loose change, collecting empathy she hadn't earned. I had to decide whether to expose everything and risk burning bridges, or to walk away quietly and rebuild. I chose the quieter path because I'm tired of drama, and because my caring nature still hates causing people pain. But I also started saying no to being the default emotional landing pad for anyone who hadn't shown they would carry me back. Saying no felt like learning to breathe again. It's not that I stopped loving Tasha. I still remember the first time she showed up with Micah, a chocolate cake, when he scraped his knee, and how she sat on my floor and hummed until I slept. People aren't only one thing, but I needed boundaries so her ambivalence wouldn't keep breaking me. The day I told her that I needed space, she looked at me with that old protective expression, and I let her have it for a second, because habit is stubborn. But then I said, "You used me like a story, Tash. You picked at my hurt like it was art." She said that hurt me, and it did. And she also said she wasn't that person, and maybe she wasn't entirely. And maybe she was a person who'd slipped into performative care because she needed attention too. That complicated things further because it made forgiveness possible and not automatic, because compassion doesn't mean being a doormat. The choice I made to protect myself first, to let some relationships dissolve, and to keep others at a different distance, was messy and lonely and also necessary. The group never quite stitched back together the same way. People rearranged around new truths, and I found quieter friends who asked questions and sat with the answers without broadcasting them. I still have nights when the water feels heavy, and I call Micah or write a letter to no one. And I still think about Tasha and the parts of her that were real and the parts that were performance. I don't want revenge. I want honest care, and learning that sometimes means walking away, setting small fences, and letting the people who truly see you cross them on their own terms.
I found out my girlfriend was pretending to need me. Happened on a Tuesday, which already tells you how stupidly normal it looked at first. I was at the campus cafe with my laptop open, pretending to study, pretending to be the kind of guy who had a plan, when I saw Grace across the room laughing into her phone like she was in some other life. Not a happy laugh exactly, more like a performance. I only noticed because she kept glancing around between sentences, checking who could see her, and the second her eyes landed on me, she changed her face. Softened it, made it look tired and sweet and a little scared. It was weird. I remember thinking for one tiny second that I was probably imagining things, seriously. I wanted that more than anything. Grace had been in my life long enough to become part of the furniture in my head. Wake up, text Grace. Finish class, text Grace. Feel empty, text Grace. She gave my days shape when I didn't have much else going on, and I hated admitting that because it made me sound weak, but it was true. I wasn't with her because everything was perfect. I was with her because without her, the hours got loose and ugly. So I sat there with my cold coffee and watched her end the call, then walk over to me with that careful little expression she only used when other people were watching. "Hey," she said, brushing my arm, "I missed you." The words should have warmed me up. They didn't. They just sat there, heavy. That night she told me she'd had a rough afternoon and that I was the only person who understood her when she got like this. I said the right things. I always said the right things. I told her I was there, that she didn't need to hold everything alone, that she could count on me. It was almost automatic by then. But something inside me had already shifted, like a chair leg cracking under my weight. Not enough to make a sound yet, just enough to make me pay attention. Over the next few days, I started noticing little things I'd been too tired to question before. Grace never needed comfort when it was just us in private. She seemed weirdly fine, almost bored, until a friend walked into the room. Then her voice changed, her hands shook. She mentioned feeling overwhelmed or unsupported in this sad, controlled way that made people look at me like I was lucky to be useful. And I guess that's what I was, useful. That word kept coming back to me. I hated it. I started looking closer like a paranoid idiot, and once you start looking, you can't really stop. Her messages were the worst part, not because they were dramatic, but because they were ordinary. I borrowed her phone to call mine one afternoon, and a notification popped up from her cousin. Something about a joke they'd made the night before, something casual and normal, and then another message from Grace that said, "I know I just have to keep him calm or he gets weird." Weird, him, not my name, not even close. I stared at it so long the screen dimmed. My mouth went dry. I told myself maybe it meant nothing, maybe I was reading too much into one text, but my stomach didn't buy it. Later, I saw another one. She was telling someone she hated how clingy I was when I was upset, but in public she'd been saying she had to rely on me because I was the only stable thing in her life. That one hit different. It wasn't just that she was lying, it was the shape of the lie. She wasn't building a real relationship. She was building a story where she looked fragile and I looked needed. Look, I'm not proud of this, but I checked more. I hate that I checked more. I went through old chats, not even looking for one big secret at first, just trying to prove to myself I'd misunderstood. I found enough to make my hands shake. She'd told people she was worried I'd leave if she didn't keep me emotionally hooked. She'd told someone else I got easier to manage when I thought she was depending on me. Manage. That word made my stomach turn. Suddenly all those nights I'd stayed up because she said she couldn't sleep, all those times I'd dropped everything because she sounded shaky on the phone, all of it felt staged under a light I didn't want to stand under. but it still hurt in a strange, hollow way because I kept asking myself whether any part of her had been real. Maybe some of it had been, maybe she'd liked me, maybe she'd even cared. I just couldn't tell anymore, and that uncertainty was worse than a clean break. When I finally confronted her, it was in the parking lot outside her apartment because I knew if I waited until inside I'd end up sitting on her couch and apologizing for seeing what I saw. I asked her straight out why she talked about me like I was some problem she had to keep in line. She stared at me like I'd slapped her. Then she tried to smile. Bad move, that tiny smile told me everything. You're making this bigger than it is, she said. Of course she did. I showed her the texts. Her face changed fast after that. Not guilt, not exactly. More like irritation that the curtain had been pulled back too early. She said I was being dramatic, that I misunderstood the context, that she only said those things because she was stressed and didn't want other people in our business. I almost laughed. It sounded rehearsed, and that was somehow worse than if she'd screamed at me. I stood there with my phone in my hand and felt something in me go completely still. No anger, not really. Just this cold, flat recognition that I'd been feeding a role, not a relationship. She said she needed me because I was the one person who stayed. I told her that was the whole point. I wasn't supposed to be a prop. She didn't answer that. She just looked past me like she was already deciding how she'd explain this to somebody else later. That's when it hit me. She wasn't sad about losing me. She was annoyed that I'd stopped playing along. I walked away before I could say something ugly, and I kept walking all the way home even though my legs felt strange, like they belonged to someone else. I expected to feel furious. I expected some huge clean emotion that would make sense of it. Instead, I felt stupid, then relieved, then empty, all in the same breath. Weirdly empty. Like all the structure I'd borrowed from her had been pulled out at once, and there I was, standing in my own life with nothing holding it up. But there was also this tiny, ugly bit of relief underneath it, because if she'd been pretending, then I wasn't crazy for feeling like something was off. I wasn't broken for not being enough. I'd just been held inside someone else's script for a while. That night I deleted our chat thread. Then I sat on my bed for hours, not even crying, just staring at the wall and listening to the house settle around me. No big ending, no dramatic last message, just silence. And for the first time in months, it wasn't her silence filling my head, it was mine.
My classmate wasn't who they said they were. I met him the week school started, when I was carrying introverted energy like a heavy coat, and he smiled at me in the stairwell like it was no big thing, and I hadn't prepared for that kindness, so I stumbled over my words and he just laughed soft and said, "Hey, I'm Caleb." And that name landed in my chest and made a little hollow feel full for a second, seriously. At first, he was the kind of person who showed up quietly at the exact times I did, same early lectures, same empty library corner. And we'd exchange those small, clumsy sentences that feel like testing a bridge, like "long day," and "you too." And then something happened where we started talking for longer stretches. About stupid things like why the vending machine always ate my coins, and later about sad things, like missing home and not fitting in. And I found myself telling him things I hadn't planned to tell anyone, because he nodded the way people do when they mean it, like he was listening to a part of me that usually got ignored. Boom, it felt like a real thing. But I've always wanted someone to understand me, so I knew the danger and I ignored it. Look, I wanted it anyway. He never talked about family. Not once. Friends would casually mention parents or siblings, and he'd change the subject with a shrug and a joke, or say he was complicated and laugh like that was the end of it. And I took that as secretiveness rather than a red flag, because secrecy can be romantic in stories, and I wanted the story to be ours. I noticed small mismatches that I smoothed over. He'd tell me he got back late from helping a friend, and 2 days later he'd say he had been out of town. And sometimes the details would wobble like a picture frame knocked on its nail, but I told myself people forget, people improvise, people don't want to feel pinned down. He was also way too quick to shut down anyone who mentioned our school, like there was a clip ready in his throat that snapped closed the second this place was named. And he'd make a joke and change the class topic, and we'd all move on because it was easier. That habit made me curious more than wary. Curiosity felt safer, like a telescope pointed at something far enough away to be interesting but not dangerous. Then the truth came out the first time I saw his eyes change when we were at a party on a Friday we shouldn't have gone to. Someone mentioned a teacher, Mr. Daniels, who teaches AP Lit, and I'd expected Caleb to roll his eyes with the rest of us, but instead his jaw tightened and his hands went still, and he asked, very quietly, "How do you know him?" As if the question itself could measure distance. I said, "He helps with the club," and he laughed too fast, like a door slamming shut, and asked to go outside. We walked to the courtyard and he kept talking, not stopping, like he was trying to empty his head, and then he said, "You shouldn't talk about that here." and I blinked because I hadn't even been thinking about secrets. I had been thinking about whether the music was too loud. He looked at me then, properly looked like he could map where my shy places were, and said, "People who ask questions get trouble." And I believed him because he said it like he was protecting me, which felt like the kindest thing anyone had done in a long time. But it's strange how protection can be a mask for control. So I let it slide. I let a lot slide. The unraveling didn't happen all at once. It came in glitch moments. He knew things he couldn't have known. He named teachers' habits with a precision that felt rehearsed. He'd laugh about events I wasn't at, but then describe them like he'd been there, and his stories stacked up into a building with no foundation. One afternoon, my friend Nia bumped into him in the hall and later told me she found it weird that he called her sis without even asking, like somebody who borrows language to feel closer. I asked him about it and he said, "Old habit." And I nodded and believed him because believing is easier than interrogating the one person who made me feel seen. What scared me most wasn't that he lied. People lie. It was how I kept ignoring the fingerprints in the dust because I wanted him to be true. That's the thing when you've been unseen most of your life. The first person who reaches for you looks like rescue even if their hand is warm from someone else's coat. I wanted someone to understand me so badly that I started matching my silence to his, making my story fit into the shape he offered. I started not telling my sister about him because I didn't want her to scoff. I started skipping some nights with friends so I could be available when he wanted to talk. I stopped saying things that would make him ask too many questions. It's like watching your own boundaries slip under your skin and not feeling it until they're gone. Then the real collapse came in a way I never expected. A letter. Not an official one, but a printed, formal-looking note someone had left in the communal mailroom, the kind of flyer universities use to remind people about safety workshops. It mentioned a student who had been placed under review for impersonation and disciplinary violations, and gave a contact number for anyone with information. My stomach fell through me. I shouldn't have assumed anything, but my hands shook in a way that told me my body had been waiting for confirmation. I recognized the details in the note, the descriptions, the timeline, and something cold slid into my spine. Because when I read further, it named a permanent address that matched the name on a package I'd seen in his doorway weeks ago. I hadn't wanted to be the one to connect the dots, but there it was. The quiet guy who lived next door, the one who knew too much and shut down conversation about this place. The one who asked me to keep quiet, maybe he wasn't who he said he was. I carried the paper like a confession, and I felt sick with the betrayal of being fooled, yes, but deeper than that was the shame of realizing I had wanted to be fooled. I confronted him the next evening because I couldn't hold the shape of suspicion without letting it press me flat. He answered the door, and for a second I didn't recognize him. Without the practiced smiles and rehearsed pauses, he looked smaller, like someone who'd been holding a pose for too long. He said, "Do you have a problem?" And his voice tried for a casualness it couldn't reach. I told him about the flyer and the package and the weird things people had noticed, and he didn't deny it outright. He hesitated and chewed the inside of his cheek, and then, unexpectedly, he told a different truth. That he'd been pretending, yes, but not for cruel reasons, for protection, he said, for a history that made him unsafe if he used his own name. He told me fragments, a name that wasn't his, a past stitched from other people's losses. All of it said like confessions always are, halting and pleading. He wanted me to understand, and I tried, because I wanted to be that person who understood, but understanding and excusing are not the same thing. And he had been building a life out of other people's textures until mine was just another borrowed sweater. I left before he could explain everything. My throat felt like a knotted rope. Outside, the corridor lights were too bright, and I hated the way everyone seemed to be going about the night like nothing had changed. Inside, though, every memory of him shifted slightly. The way his hand brushed mine over a textbook suddenly meant something else. The jokes we shared now sounded edited. I felt manipulated, like an actor who just found out the script had been different the whole time. It wasn't just that he'd lied to me, it was that he had used my loneliness as a place to hide. That realization hurt less because I was embarrassed, it hurt because it proved I had been willing to believe for comfort. Days after, people asked me what happened and I made small answers, and then left the conversation because explaining felt like peeling a scab. I kept replaying the months like a detective with a half-made case. And the worst part was the intimacy of the clues. The nights he chose to visit when I was alone. The way he deflected family talk when my sister's name came up. How quickly he turned our shared spaces into a private sphere where he decided what could be said. It taught me something messy. I can be lonely and still have the right to be guarded. Wanting someone doesn't mean I should hand them my map. I also learned to trust the small warnings my body gives me, the way my stomach knots, the way I feel my voice shrink, instead of smoothing them over because I don't want the moment to end. I don't know what he'll do next or whether he'll face consequences, and part of me is relieved not to have the weight of deciding that. What I do know is that I keep replaying a sentence he once said, soft and almost invisible. People who ask questions get trouble. He said it like it was wisdom, but now it sounds more like a rule he wanted me to follow so he'd never have to be found out. There's a bitter comfort in recognizing the lesson. You can want connection and still protect yourself, and sometimes the cost of wanting is learning how to say no.
I did something small, and it spiraled into the biggest decision of my life. I left the club room before roll call, seriously. I remember the fluorescent lights humming, the stale smell of poster glue, Ms. Bennett's clipboard tapping like a metronome, and how I told myself one meeting wouldn't matter because I had a headache and needed to breathe. I told myself that in the stairwell too, pacing like I could walk the tightness out of my chest, counting steps. 1, 2, because that's what I do, quantify things until they feel tame. I didn't tell anyone I was having trouble sleeping or that my stomach had been hollower than normal for weeks. I didn't say the word depression because there was a voice in my head that folded it into nerves and just pushed through. So I missed the meeting, sat on the bench outside the art room with my backpack between my knees, and let the corridor noise flatten me for half an hour until I felt safe enough to go home. That was the small thing, the thing that should have been nothing. The next day there was an email flagged urgent. Attendance penalties applied to members who missed 2 unexcused meetings this term. I skimmed it and felt a prickle of annoyance, bureaucracy again. But then my mind did its slow, precise thing where it lays tracks. Scholarship eligibility required club participation required attendance required presence at meetings, 2 unexcused absences and I'd be on probation. I opened my calendar and mapped it all in neat blocks, the way I'd always managed my life, and watched the tidy grid tilt. Okay, I thought, I can go, I can be there next week. I can fix 1 missed meeting with 2 perfect ones. I always fix things. But fix is a word built for people who have energy to spare. The week after, the fog tightened. Schoolwork became a series of checkboxes I stared at until my eyes smarted. Answers came out of me like memorized lines. I kept smiling when teachers made comments in the hall. I kept offering to stay late on group projects. I couldn't let them see the inside of the suitcase I was carrying, anxiety, the kind that elbows every plan out of place. So when the next club night rolled around, my chest was denser, and I felt a nauseous pressure every time I tried to breathe through it. But the attendance email sat in my head like a metronome. Go, attend, don't risk the scholarship. What would Mom say? What would Talia say? Scholarships meant options, meant not having to ask for help, meant the future I pictured in my notebooks, a future where competence bought me safety. I went to the meeting and performed myself, the attentive nods, the neat notes, the ideas delivered with lightness. People said thanks afterward. I smiled. I lied through my teeth and then went home and sobbed into my pillow until my face was hot and my throat raw. That performance demanded energy I didn't have, and each performance cost me something else. The scholarship committee required an interview in 2 weeks. Ms. Bennett said they'd look favourably on active members. My chest tightened every time I thought of an interviewer seeing the polished version of me and asking what I do for self-care, the honest answer. Sometimes I can't get out of bed. Felt like handing over my 1 bargaining chip and watching it dissolve. So I compartmentalized more. I logged volunteer hours I didn't always finish. I said yes to responsibilities even when my head was a fog. I crafted emails that made me sound steady. Outside, I became the version of Ella who never asked for help. Inside, I unraveled in increments. Then the attendance penalty letter arrived in my locker. Not an email this time, a formal slip with the principal's stamp and the words probationary status. My hands shook reading it. I ran my thumb over the embossed edge like it would explain itself. 2 unexcused absences, they wrote. You are required to provide justification within 5 school days or face revocation of scholarship recommendation. The paper felt heavier than an inch of cardstock had any right to be. I thought about telling the truth, writing a sentence that said I had been struggling, that I needed a day, that the pressure of maintaining everything had gotten to me. But I also imagined the counselor's polite look, the slightly awkward shift in how teachers would treat me, the way people who once relied on me would distance themselves because vulnerability makes them uncomfortable. I could hear Ms. Bennett's voice in my head again, that offhand, "You're just nervous," from months ago when I'd mentioned panic in a passing sentence. The dismissal strung like a bruise. If she and the system treated it like nerves, what would happen if I said something bigger? I tried to engineer a middle path. I wrote a note that leaned into plausible externalities, family obligations, a conflicting appointment. It was the kind of crafted omission I excelled at, telling enough truth to be credible while protecting the part of me that felt like a liability. I slipped the note under the office door at dawn and told myself it was temporary deception for a practical purpose. When the committee contacted me to verify attendance, I kept to the script I'd rehearsed. I felt shame flicker, like a small bird trapped behind my ribs, but I told myself the bird would survive if it stayed small. Then Sophia found me in the corridor. She's the kind of person who senses things without scanning, the opposite of me. She asked if I was okay with a directness that didn't demand an answer. I almost said, fine, because it's the easiest autopilot response, but then she looked at me like she'd seen me before the armor, and I couldn't. I told her about the headache, about the stairs, about the bench outside the art room. I told her about the letter. Her face rearranged into a dozen small, efficient expressions, concern, calculation, then the kind of fierce clarity I tend to avoid. "You have to tell them," she said. Her voice wasn't loud or dramatic, it was a statement like a fact. "They can't penalize you for being sick. You shouldn't have to choose between health and future." Her clarity tore something and healed something at the same time. For the first time, the idea of saying the truth felt like an act that belonged to me, not a surrender. But the truth had consequences. If I told the truth, the scholarship committee might require documentation, mental health resources might get involved, and suddenly my private mess would be a paper trail. The thought terrified me. I pictured my parents at the dining table, the conversation clipped and clinical, an adult voice saying, "We'll need a doctor's note," and me repeating details I'd been protecting from even myself. The privacy I'd held onto for years felt at risk. The deadline loomed. I slept in fits and starts, every hour a small punishment. In the quiet hours I rehearsed both pathways. Path A, continue performing, keep the scholarship, keep the future tidy, keep pretending until the cracks got too big to hide. Path B, tell the truth, risk bureaucracy and pity and other people's assumptions, but maybe breathe afterward. The choice stopped being academic. It was a weighing of what I would owe myself versus what I'd been taught to prize. On the 5th day, I sat at my desk with the letter and a blank email to the scholarship committee, and I realized something small and enormous. My competence had always been a contract I made with other people's expectations. I had been bargaining with my life for approval. Maybe it was naive, but the moment I acknowledged that, the ledger tilted. I wrote the email. I wrote about needing time for health reasons, about experiencing symptoms consistent with depression and anxiety, and I asked what documentation they required and whether accommodations could be considered. My fingers trembled on send, as if the movement itself was an admission. The response was immediate and bureaucratic, polite, full of forms, and a request to set up a meeting with a counsellor. Ms. Bennett's reply had the same flatness, but there was an undershot of something I'd missed before. She asked if I wanted help accessing the school counsellor. The committee requested documentation, but also offered an extension for my scholarship materials while accommodations were considered. The world did not automatically collapse. It rearranged. The consequences I had feared were real. There were meetings, a counsellor intake form, conversations at home that felt clinical, but they also introduced a strange new option: honesty that didn't equate to failure. Telling the truth changed things I hadn't anticipated. There was awkwardness, yes. There was an afternoon with Dad making too many practical comments. There was the counsellor's chair and the bright waiting room. But I also learned how to ask for small, practical things, an extension, reduced responsibilities for a term, that kept my scholarship application alive while giving me space. It wasn't neat. I still felt fragile. Some days I thought I'd made a terrible mistake. Other days I felt a rare lightness because I hadn't had to carry everything alone. That small absence, one missed meeting, had become a hinge. It forced a decision that felt catastrophic at first but ultimately asked me a different question. Which was I willing to lose, my illusion of flawless competence or my chance to actually get well? I found I couldn't keep both. The scholarship, the neat future, the silent competence, they were all tied to a version of me that was constantly paying interest on stress. Choosing honesty meant accepting that the world would see the interest payments, that they'd ask about them, that sometimes they'd respond with forms instead of comfort. But it also meant I could stop doing small, performative things to hide the damage. It meant that the most radical, terrifying act I had done was to let someone else hold the truth for a minute, while I figured out how to breathe again. My boss tried to ruin my life, so I destroyed his legally. I knew something was wrong the second Mr. Cumulo started smiling at me like I was already in trouble. It was my 3rd week at the internship, and I'd done everything right. I showed up early. I stayed late. I answered emails fast. I fixed other people's mistakes without making a scene. That was the whole point, right? Be useful, be quiet, be impossible to fault. But he picked me anyway. He picked me like he'd decided I was a problem before I'd even opened my mouth. At first it was tiny stuff. Little comments in front of everyone. Maya's still learning how deadlines work. Maybe she needs less detail and more common sense. He'd assign me tasks, then change the instructions in vague ways and act confused when I followed the original version. Seriously, every time I asked for clarification, he'd sigh like I was exhausting him on purpose. If I made a note, he said I was being defensive. If I didn't, he said I wasn't paying attention. There was no right answer. Just me trying to stand still while he kept moving the floor. The worst part was how careful he was. Nothing he said sounded bad by itself. Taken one sentence at a time, he was just a stern supervisor with high standards. But stacked together, day after day, it became a pattern. He'd CC people on emails after giving me impossible deadlines. He'd forget to tell me about meeting changes and then blame me for missing them. He once handed me a file 10 minutes before a presentation and said, loud enough for half the office to hear, that if I couldn't handle pressure, maybe I wasn't cut out for the work. I went home that night and cried in the shower so no one would hear me. I already had depression and I'd been trying to keep it under control. I didn't hide it because I was ashamed. I hid it because I knew how people get when they hear that word. They start looking for a weakness instead of a reason. Mr. Cumulo found out anyway, after I mentioned being on medication to a coworker I trusted. After that, he got worse in a way that still makes my stomach twist. When I asked for a private conversation about workload, he said, Maya, I can't keep accommodating mood swings. When I told him I'd had a rough week and needed clarity on priorities, he said I shouldn't bring personal issues into a professional space. Then he kept overloading me and acted surprised when I started missing deadlines he'd set up to fail. So I stopped trying to win his approval and started collecting facts. Quietly, obsessively, I saved every email. I took screenshots of chat messages. I wrote down dates, times, who was in the room, what was said, what was changed, and what got blamed on me after the fact. If he moved a meeting, I kept the original invite and the new one. If he corrected my work in public, I noted who saw it. If he praised me in one message and then blamed me for the same thing in another, I saved both. It felt paranoid at first, then it felt necessary, then it felt like the only thing keeping me upright. I also started talking to people, not about revenge, about memory. Do you remember when he said that? Was I the only one not told about the rescheduled meeting? Did you hear him say that in front of everyone? Sophia helped more than she knew. Layla too. A few co-workers were nervous, but they confirmed enough. One of them even sent me a message saying Mr. Cumulo had done almost the same thing to her the previous year, just not as openly. That was the moment I stopped thinking maybe I was overreacting. I wasn't imagining a pattern. I was documenting one. The legal part was slower and colder than I expected. No dramatic music, no instant justice. Just forms, timelines, policies, HR meetings, and one lawyer who kept asking me to stay factual because facts survive better than emotions in those rooms. I hated that part. I hated how my voice shook when I read back the notes. I hated that I had to sound calm while describing things that had made me feel small enough to disappear. But I kept going. Because every time I thought about quitting, I remembered how easy it had been for him to call me unstable when all I'd been doing was trying not to break. When the investigation finally started, he changed completely. The fake kindness vanished. He stopped smiling. He started watching me like I'd betrayed him by refusing to stay silent. Then came the panic. He called me into his office and asked why I was making this bigger than it needed to be. He told me I could still fix this. He said a young woman like me didn't want to get a reputation as difficult. That part almost made me laugh. Almost. Because the man who had been trying to ruin my reputation for months was now acting like I'd invented harm by naming it. The hearing was brutal. Clean and brutal. Emails on a screen. Timestamps. Witness statements. Inconsistencies laid out one after another until his story stopped holding shape. He tried to explain things away, but the problem with patterns is that they don't care how polished your excuses sound. They just keep pointing back at you. In the end, the findings were public within the organization. He was removed from supervising interns, placed under formal review, and his conduct became the subject of a broader complaint process. People who used to look through me suddenly couldn't meet my eyes. And still, I didn't feel victorious the way movies make it look. I felt tired, empty, even vindicated, yes, absolutely. But also weirdly alone, because once the institution finally listened, it expected that to be enough. Like being right would also make me healed. It didn't. It just meant the pain had been acknowledged in writing. No one brought back the months I spent tightening my jaw in meetings or dreading every new email. No one asked whether I had someone with me after the decision came down. They just moved on. The system had spoken. My body still hadn't caught up. What I remember most now isn't the win. It's the cost. The nights I kept my phone on silent because one email from him could wreck me for hours. The way I stopped trusting my own memory until I had proof for everything. The strange loneliness of being believed after months of being dismissed. People like to say justice feels clean. It doesn't, it feels procedural. It feels earned with interest. It feels like carrying your own bruises into a room and proving, line by line, that they didn't happen by accident. I'm glad I did it. I'd do it again. But I'll never pretend it didn't take something out of me that I still haven't fully gotten back.
I stayed quiet for years, then finally told the truth about my family's secret. I used to think silence was just part of being the oldest daughter in a house like mine. You learn fast when to speak, when to pretend, when to smile like everything is fine, even when the air in the room feels heavy enough to crush you. My family was really good at acting normal in public. Sunday lunches, clean clothes, polite laughs, the whole thing. People saw us and thought we had it together. They had no idea how much work it took just to keep that lie standing. Seriously, every day felt like holding up a cracked wall with my bare hands. My mom would get this tight look on her face whenever anything uncomfortable came up, like the problem wasn't the thing itself. It was me making it visible. My dad had a way of turning every warning sign into an inconvenience. If Micah was crying, I was told to distract him. If I looked tired, I was told to stop being dramatic. If I said I was scared, I was told to keep the peace. Keep the peace. I heard that phrase so many times it started to feel like a command written into the walls. And I listened. For years, I listened. Micah was the only reason I still felt like a person sometimes. He was younger, smaller, always watching me like I had answers I didn't really have. He'd slip into my room at night and ask if things were going to be okay. And I'd say yes, even when I knew better. I'd smooth his hair back and tell him to sleep, that I'd handle everything. I didn't handle everything. I just got better at hiding how bad it was. There was a secret in my house, one nobody said out loud, but everybody worked around like a broken chair in the middle of the kitchen. My mom drank more than she admitted, not in a messy, obvious way most people would spot from outside. That was the worst part. It was slow, quiet. She'd pour one glass and then another, then start getting sharp with her words, then cruel, then sorry in the morning, then defensive when anyone looked tired of the cycle. My dad acted like if he ignored it long enough, it would stop existing. It didn't. It just got bigger. And because nobody named it, everybody blamed something else. my grades, my mood, Micah's behavior. The house was always one bad night away from falling apart, and somehow that was treated like normal. I started getting depressed somewhere in the middle of all that, though at the time, I just thought I was becoming weak. I stopped caring about school the way I used to. I stopped texting friends back. Tasha kept asking if I was okay, and I kept saying I was just tired. Ms. Nadu pulled me aside once after class and asked if anything was going on at home. I almost told her. I swear I did. But I remembered the look my mom would give me when she thought I was about to embarrass the family, and I swallowed the words. I went home and acted fine. That's what I was good at. Fine. Fine enough for other people to stop asking. Then came the night I couldn't keep doing it. My mom had been drinking for hours. My dad was already in that numb, distant mode where he acted like he was somewhere else, even when he was right there. Micah had been trying to finish homework at the table, but every little sound seemed to set my mom off. She snapped at him for breathing too loudly. He looked at me, and I saw it in his face, that tiny, terrified question he always had but never said. I told him to go to my room. My mom heard me and said I was coddling him again, like that was the problem, like love itself was the issue. Then she turned on me and started listing everything I'd ever done wrong. Every time I'd looked at her funny, every time I'd failed to be easy enough for her to handle. My dad said my name once, like a warning, but he didn't stop her. That's what made something in me snap. Not the yelling, not even the drinking. It was the fact that I could feel Micah listening from the hallway while my parents performed this same awful script. And I realized I was done teaching him that this was what family looked like. So I said it. I said the secret out loud. I said Mom had a drinking problem. I said we'd all been walking on eggshells around her for years. I said my depression wasn't random, and it wasn't me being ungrateful or lazy or too sensitive. I said I was exhausted from pretending we were fine when we were. The room went dead quiet. Dead. My dad looked at me like I'd slapped him. My mom started crying, but not in the relieved, honest way. In the furious, cornered way. She said I was cruel. She said I was trying to destroy the family. That one almost broke me, because for a second I nearly believed her. Nearly. But then Micah stepped out from the hallway and said, very softly, "She's telling the truth." Boom. That was it. One small sentence, and the whole thing split open. My dad went pale. My mom stopped talking. Nobody knew what to do with the truth once it was sitting in the room with us. After that, everything changed in ways I didn't expect. Not all at once. Not like in movies. There was no instant healing. There were ugly conversations, slammed doors, tears I'd been holding back for years. My Aunt Brenda got involved. Grandma Rose called every day for a week. My dad finally admitted he'd known more than he'd ever said. My mom got angry before she got honest, and the honest part was hard to hear because it came with excuses and shame and years of damage wrapped together. But the biggest change was inside me. I stopped feeling like I had to protect everyone from the truth. I still loved them. I still do. That part never disappeared. But love isn't supposed to mean disappearing yourself. It took me way too long to learn that. I started therapy. I started sleeping more. I started telling Tasha what was actually going on. And Micah, my sweet, careful brother, started looking less like he was waiting for the next blow and more like a kid again. It wasn't perfect. It still is. But for the first time in years, I can breathe without feeling like I'm stealing air from someone else.
My boss tried to ruin my life, so I destroyed theirs legally. I started working there because it paid rent and nothing about it was supposed to be a story I tell later. But then he showed up, smiling like he owned the world and acting like every mood I had was his personal problem. So I kept my head down and counted the minutes until payday, because that's what you do when you're trying not to make anything worse. He made jokes about my depression like it was a fashion accessory he could comment on between sips of coffee, wrote me up for things that were either made up or petty, and treated me like smiling on command was a job requirement he was inventing on the spot. He assumed I'd quit before I fought back, and he couldn't have been happier about that assumption. I don't give a fuck about dramatics, but here's the thing. Passive isn't the same as helpless, and the more he tried to pressure me, the more obvious his pattern became. So I started collecting everything, quietly, the way someone puts rocks in their pockets knowing a storm's coming. Emails, schedules, text threads, witness statements, little screenshots that looked like nothing on their own but together looked like a scrapbook of intent. I made a folder and I kept adding to it like a person building evidence instead of a playlist. He doubled down, got sloppy, started CCing other managers on the petty shit so he could gloat, and every extra copy he sent was another signature on the paper trail. Boom, more proof. People who saw him didn't talk at first because that's how fear works in workplaces. Small humiliations normalize fast and people pretend it's normal. But a few coworkers started whispering to me the same things they'd said to each other, and I wrote their names down and asked them out of the blue if they'd be willing to confirm what they saw. They said yes, because once you name something that hurts you, you want it gone. I didn't tell anyone I was building a case. I played him like he was predictable, like every shove would make him reveal more of himself, and he obliged by being obvious. Then I went to HR with the folder and gave them a narrative, dates, copies, witnesses, timelines, and I watched the smirk fade from his face the way winter swallows a summer day. HR didn't move fast at first because that's how systems work. Paperwork interviews will get back to you. But then their interviews started lining up with mine, and receipts don't care about someone's charm offensive. He tried to spin things. Of course, he was loud, dramatic, the kind of guy who thinks a megaphone is the same as proof. But emails don't lie and schedules don't wink. The evidence was clean and methodical, and it showed pattern, not opinion. I gave HR the whole folder, answered their questions in short sentences, and sat there while they read his messages back to him. It was surreal hearing him try to act innocent in a room full of his own words. He thought he could intimidate his way out of it, thought the story ends when the loudest person gets louder. But legal and HR processes are mostly boring forms, signatures, policy citations, and boring wins when the other side keeps behaving like an idiot. Meanwhile, I made sure my own record was tidy. I had never missed a deadline without a reason. I had saved copies of my work. I had witnesses who said he targeted me and treated others differently. And the whole thing stopped looking like a personality conflict and started looking like harassment. When HR escalated it, the company's legal team asked for a timeline and I gave them one. They asked for corroboration and I gave them witnesses. They asked for any personal messages and I handed over the screenshots he'd sent pretending to joke. Watching him realize that his favorite power move, blame the quiet person until they run, wasn't working anymore was almost beautiful. He went from cocky to frantic in stages, like a man whose script had been taken away. He tried to gaslight colleagues, pulled the sympathy card, threatened to sue on principle. But threats don't look good when you've been CCing managers on petty digs and calling someone weak in writing. The legal team prepared termination paperwork with a calmness that made the room colder. They also prepared settlement language and confidentiality clauses because corporations tidy messes in whispers, not fireworks. I wanted accountability more than money. I wanted him to understand that there are consequences for treating someone's illness like a punchline, and that allowing a manager to weaponize personality at work is a liability the company can't afford. When HR finally moved, it was quick. The company doesn't like precedents, and they especially don't like external risk. So what had taken months of small cruelties dissolved into a handful of meetings, signatures, and a last-ditch explanation from him that sounded weak even to his own ears. He tried to plead ignorance, tried to say he'd been misunderstood, but the documents I brought were a map of intent and behavior. They lined up. His little routine mock, write up, isolate, expect resignation collapsed because I refused to be the predictable exit and because I didn't let the pattern hide behind charisma. People who had been silent at first came forward in waves once they saw HR taking it seriously. There was safety in numbers, and suddenly his actions were not anecdote but chorus. He was put on leave, then the company opened an investigation, then they offered him a severance package with a non-disparagement clause that would have made him swallow his pride forever if he signed it. The alternative was termination for cause, and everyone knows that looks worse on a resume. He picked the severance like a man choosing his last accessory, and in the end the company cleaned the slate in a way that made it clear management had been alerted and corrective steps were taken. I didn't celebrate like I'd won a fight. I felt relief, which is quieter but truer, relief that the daily mockery stopped, relief that my coworkers didn't have to keep pretending, relief that someone in a suit read his emails and decided they weren't acceptable. Some people ask if I felt guilty about ruining his life. I don't see it that way. He built the scaffolding for his own downfall with his words and attitude, and I used the same tools everyone else uses in a workplace: documentation and policy. He thought he'd break me by being louder, but all he did was make his own record undeniable. If there's a lesson here, it's not some heroic manifesto. It's simple and dull. Document, collect, ask witnesses, and take things through the proper channels rather than trying to perform justice yourself. The law and HR move slowly, but they're built to take patterns seriously, and loudness isn't a shield when it leaves a paper trail. I walk into work now without that weight, and sometimes I think about the look on his face when he realized the folder existed, like someone who'd been convinced he'd be the main character and then found out he was a footnote.
Am I the asshole for refusing to cover for my friend after she humiliated me at lunch? I was already trying to make myself smaller before lunch even started. That was just my thing at school. Keep my head down, laugh when other people laughed, don't take up space, don't give anyone a reason to look twice. It sounds pathetic now, I know, but when you spend enough time feeling like the awkward extra person in every room, you start acting like you're lucky anyone lets you sit there at all. Brooke knew that. That's the part that still gets under my skin. She knew exactly how I was, and she still did it anyway. We were at this stupid table in the cafeteria, the kind of table where everybody was talking at once and nobody was really listening to anyone except themselves. Brooke was in one of her moods, loud and funny and performing for whoever was nearby, and I was just eating my food and trying to disappear. Then she looked at me, smiled that sharp little smile she gets when she's about to say something mean and pretend it's a joke, and said something about my weight that made the whole table go quiet for half a second. Not a funny quiet, the kind where you can feel your face go hot because everyone heard it and everyone knows it was about you, but they're waiting to see whether you'll act like you don't care. Seriously, I laughed. Of course I did. I did that stupid nervous laugh and stared at my tray like it was suddenly fascinating. Brooke kept going like it was nothing, like she hadn't just reached over and slapped me in front of everybody without using her hand. Then people started asking what happened, because apparently they all heard enough to know something was off, and Brooke turned to me later like I was supposed to help her out. She wanted me to back her up. She wanted me to say it was all a misunderstanding, that she was joking, that I was being too sensitive. I just looked at her and said no. Not loudly, I didn't make a scene, I didn't yell, I just said I wasn't covering for her after what she said to me. That was it. That was the line. And you'd think I had thrown a chair. Brooke's face changed instantly. She acted like I had betrayed her in public, like I was the one who'd stabbed her in the back. She started saying I had embarrassed her on purpose, that I was being dramatic, that I always made things weird when she was just trying to have fun. Half the people at the table went along with it because that's what people do when one person is loud enough and confident enough. They pick the version that keeps the room easy. Mine didn't. Mine had too much truth in it, so suddenly I was the problem. Brooke told everyone I ruined lunch. Then she told people I ruined her whole week, like one small refusal from me was somehow worse than her deciding to humiliate me in front of everybody. And the worst part was how fast some of our friends switched into that fake concerned voice, asking why I couldn't just let it go, asking why I had to make such a big deal out of it, asking why I couldn't be the bigger person. The bigger person. I hated that phrase so much in that moment I could have cried. Because I was always the bigger person. That was my whole role. I was the one who absorbed the joke, swallowed the insult, smiled through the sting, and let everyone else stay comfortable. I was the one who never said when something hurt because I was terrified that if I complained, people would decide I was annoying and too much and stop wanting me around entirely. So when I finally said no, it felt huge to me. It felt like ripping off skin, but to them, it just looked like attitude. Brooke stopped talking to me after that, or more like she only talked to me when she wanted to make sure I knew how awful I was being. She said I made her look cruel. I guess that's because she was cruel. Funny how that works. People kept telling me she didn't mean it like that, which was wild. Because what else was I supposed to think when she picked my body and turned it into entertainment? I started replaying everything in my head, every lunch, every time I laughed too hard at a joke about myself just so nobody would know it landed. Every time I pretended not to care because caring made me feel weak. And I kept wondering if I really had overreacted. That's the part I hate admitting. Even now, a part of me still wants to say sorry just to make the tension go away. But another part of me is so tired of being the girl who gets hurt and then apologizes for bleeding. Brooke said I ruined the friendship, but I don't think a real friend would need me to lie for them after they humiliated me. I think she wanted me small enough to keep laughing at myself with everybody else. I think the minute I didn't do that, she saw me as a problem. Maybe that's why it ended. Maybe I stopped being easy. Maybe that's all this ever was.
I did something small, and it spiraled into the biggest decision of my life. I told myself I was just staying home. I told myself it was only one night, one stupid, exhausted night where I couldn't stand the way everyone's faces folded into that same worried shape when I sat down and they said, "Cheer up, no, you're fine." And like that phrase had become a physical thing in the room, a lamp with a dead bulb everyone refused to change. So I skipped dinner and I lay on my bedroom floor with my socks still on because I couldn't be bothered to take them off, and I watched light leak under the curtains and thought, okay, this is fine just tonight, nothing dramatic, except the way things always work is that decisions are contagious. So when I didn't show up the next night, my mom texted short, calm, "You alright?" And I typed back, "Yeah," because that's what you do. You patch the hole with the thinnest fabric until someone asks for the real coat, and then you realize you don't have it. So I didn't go the third night either, and when Aunt Mara called, I let it go to voicemail, which is big for me because my voice registers as an obligation and obligations hurt. That small first absence was a crack, and in the crack, light got in and revealed the dust I'd been pretending didn't exist. It revealed the truth I'd been smoothing over with jokes and silence. Being fine had become a script I was reading to keep the peace, and the peace was killing me quietly. I started to notice things about the dinners I had been attending without thinking. The mashed potatoes that never needed salt, my cousin Zane laughing too loud at a joke he didn't make, the way everyone looked at each other like they were checking off boxes, and every observation landed like a pebble in my chest. I thought I could go back. I tried. The first time I went back was a Wednesday, which felt like a small, safe lie. Nobody notices Wednesdays. And at the table, my mother slid a bowl toward me and said, "You were missed," with the exact tone of someone who wants you to trade sadness for appreciation. And I smiled because that's what you do to prevent more questions. Finn texted later, "You around?" And I typed, "Yeah," and stared at the message for a long time like it might change into a map, but it stayed flat. The more I tried to fit into who I had been, the more it didn't fit. It pinched in places I hadn't realized existed, and then I noticed Adrian looking at me differently, not accusing, not pitying, just like someone who'd seen a small animal limping and didn't know whether to touch it. Conversation shifted. Instead of the usual safe topics, movies, school, Mr. Jacob's thin patience, there were pauses that felt like doors opening and not slamming shut. Someone eventually asked, "Are you okay?" Not in that performative way with a ribbon of expectation tied around it, but with real silence afterwards, like they were waiting for me to fill it with something honest. The silence was heavy. I almost filled it with the same automatic answer I'd been rehearsing, but this time the answer didn't fit my mouth. It sounded foreign, like when you hear a song you used to love and realize you no longer know the words. So I said, "I don't know," and the words shocked everyone because they were words I hadn't allowed myself before, which is funny. The smallest change in behavior unlocked language I hadn't used in years. My aunt's eyebrows knit in that particular way they do when she's attempting to translate feelings into next steps, and my dad, who usually fixes things with plans, asked, "Did something happen?" And I didn't have a neat thing to hand him. I had a collage of days that felt the same, getting dressed, going through motions, laughing at a joke only to feel like water inside a glass with a hairline crack. That night we didn't really solve anything, but something else happened. Alina, who rarely speaks first, said, "You don't have to pretend with me," and the sentence was a small axe. It cut. I didn't know I wanted that cut, but it was necessary. After that, conversations changed shape. There were awkward silences that didn't try to be removed. There were long stretches where nobody tried to fix me. It was unnerving and liberating in the same breath. I started leaving slightly earlier from family gatherings, or arriving later, small logistical edits that felt like carving out space. In those spaces, I began noticing my own rhythms, the way my chest tightened in crowded rooms, the small nausea that hit when a question demanded more than "I'm fine," the times I wanted to sleep for a week and not be judged for it. I kept thinking I could reverse it, stitch back the seam, but every attempt made the seam more obvious. People who knew me best began showing different kinds of attention. Cousin Zane sent playlists with no words, just instrumentals, and wrote for when you can't be words. Finn started leaving his skateboard at my door and would knock and say nothing and stay for 10 minutes and leave, and those silences built something like trust. My mother stopped saying "cheer up" and instead asked, "Do you want to talk to someone?" Which was, to me, the gentlest thing she'd said in a year, and I realize now that gentle questions can be more dangerous than blunt ones because they make room for truth. The chain of small, imperfect steps pushed me toward a place I hadn't planned to go, a therapist's office. It felt absurd and enormous. The first session is a weird, bureaucratic sorrow. You sign forms and then you sit with someone whose whole job is to not fix you but to listen and point out patterns. I remember the waiting room carpet and how it looked like it had been chosen to be neutral on purpose, like the world wanted to avoid making impressions. I lied in the intake form when they asked if I had thoughts of hurting myself. I wrote sometimes and then circled the box like it was homework. The therapist, Ms. Naidu, didn't act surprised when I said I had been pretending my whole life. She just nodded like someone who'd seen enough to know the sound of a voice folding in on itself. The work started as small things, naming feelings, noticing that "fine" had been a catch-all for a dozen smaller unacknowledged hurts, learning that grief can look like boredom and that exhaustion can look like apathy. We did homework where I had to notice one pleasant thing a day, and at first the list was pathetic: the spoon I liked, a patch of sun on the pavement, but then the list grew into real observations. The smell of wet cement after rain, the way neighbor Elias watered his succulents with a tiny, careful hand. Slowly, days accumulated into a life that felt more mine. I learned to refuse some dinners without guilt because I could spend that time doing other repair, talking to a friend who'd been quiet, writing a paragraph, sleeping. The final and terrifying pivot came when I realized normal had been less a state and more a role I'd been performing so others could remain comfortable. The role required that I stay small. In return, the house remained calm and untroubled, and everyone else could keep being themselves. Choosing not to perform felt selfish at first, like I'd broken a promise I never explicitly made, but the idea of continuing the play felt dishonest in a new way. One Sunday, after a long week of noticing and saying small truths, I didn't go to the big family lunch and I texted, "I need time to think. I can't keep pretending I'm fine." The text was short and direct, and it caused an uproar of sorts, like waves when a stone hits a pond. People called. Aunt Mara prepared casseroles she didn't deliver. My dad drove over and sat on the stoop, and we drank tea in silence until he said, "What would you want?" And for the first time, the question wasn't a lid, it was a door. I told him I didn't know, and then I told him a list of things I didn't want. To keep smiling when I wasn't, to accept pat answers, to let small hurts stack into big ones because they're easier to hide. Saying the list aloud made it real. The biggest decision wasn't dramatic at the moment. It was the consequence of an accumulation of tiny acts of honesty. Skipping a dinner, saying "I don't know," going to therapy, letting people sit in silence without fixing me, refusing the role I'd been handed. The decision was to stop performing fine as a lifestyle and to start living toward something uncertain but true. People adjusted the way people do, awkwardly, kindly, with mistakes, but they adjusted. Some relationships narrowed and some deepened. I stopped saying "I'm fine" reflexively and started saying nothing or small truths like "I'm tired" or "I had a hard week." And those sentences were clumsy at first, but they were accurate and they taught people how to be with me. It's strange, a tiny act of absence turned into the 1,000 small presences that build a self. Skipping that first dinner felt like an accident, but it was the first authentic refusal I'd made in a long time, and once you refuse a role, you begin to discover which parts of you were always pretending and which parts have always been waiting. My dad tried to ruin my life, so I destroyed his. The first time I realized my own father was treating me like a problem to be managed, I was sitting on the edge of my bed at 2 a.m., staring at a text he'd sent that basically said I was lazy, dramatic, and a drain on the house. I didn't even answer right away. I just kept reading it like maybe if I stared hard enough, it would turn into something else. It didn't. That was the thing with him. He could always sound so calm, so reasonable, so much like the responsible adult in the room, while I was the one shaking, trying not to fall apart in my own bedroom. Everyone else saw him as steady. I saw the version of him that only came out behind closed doors, the one who acted like depression was a bad attitude and silence was disrespect. He didn't hit me, he didn't need to. He just chipped away at me until getting out of bed felt like I was climbing a wall with no top. I started keeping everything after that, every text, every voice note, every time he changed his story. Every time he said one thing to my face and another thing when other people were around. I saved screenshots in a hidden folder on my phone, then copied them to a drive, then to another one because I stopped trusting luck. I wrote down dates in a notebook under my mattress. I made notes after arguments while my hands were still trembling. It sounds paranoid now, but at the time it felt like the only way I could prove I wasn't losing my mind. Because that was his favorite trick, honestly, make me doubt what had happened, then act offended when I tried to remember it clearly. He'd say, "That's not what I said," with this flat, tired voice like I was the one twisting things, and for a while I almost believed him. Almost, but patterns don't lie forever. They pile up. They start leaning against the walls. One day I was scrolling through the messages I'd saved and I saw it all at once, the shape of it, the whole ugly rhythm of how he worked. He'd de-provoke me privately, then act shocked publicly. He'd call me unstable, then tell relatives he was worried about me. He'd detail people I was refusing help while he was supposedly doing everything he could. It was so polished it made me sick, so I stopped arguing with him. That was the first real change. I smiled less, said less, handed him nothing. He thought I was giving up. I was building a record. He kept making mistakes because he got arrogant. That's what people like him do. They think control is the same thing as being smart. They think if they sound composed long enough, nobody will ever check the file cabinet, but I checked everything. I even started writing down times and witnesses after conversations. If he got loud in the kitchen, I wrote it down. If he said I'd agreed to something and I hadn't, I wrote it down. If he made promises in front of someone else, I wrote that too. It got weirdly calm after a while, not happy, just calm in a strange, cold way, like I was standing outside a storm instead of in the middle of it. Then came the moment that flipped everything. He tried to use my own situation against me, trying to make it look like I was unreliable and difficult so he could control the story before anyone else heard mine. That was when I stopped waiting for him to stop being awful and started putting the facts where they actually mattered. I went through the proper channels, quietly, carefully, no screaming, no dramatic scene. I brought the messages, the dates, the contradictions, the timeline, all of it. I didn't make a speech, I didn't beg anyone to believe me. I just handed over what I had and let the record speak for itself. And wow, that was enough. It was more than enough. The fallout didn't look like the movies. Nobody kicked down a door. Nobody burst into tears on cue. It was quieter than that, which somehow made it worse for them and better for me. The polished version of him started cracking in public because once the right people saw the same pattern I'd been living with, there wasn't any graceful way out. Suddenly, he wasn't the concerned father anymore. He was the man with too many explanations and not enough clean answers. People who used to nod along started asking sharper questions. The same people who'd looked at me like I was difficult started looking at him like they'd missed something obvious. That part felt surreal. I kept waiting for the old panic to hit, for the guilt, for the little voice that said I'd gone too far, but it didn't come. Instead, I felt this slow, heavy relief, like my chest had been packed with wet sand for years and somebody had finally started scooping it out. I'm not going to pretend it fixed everything. It didn't. My life didn't suddenly turn easy. Depression doesn't vanish because someone gets exposed, and family stuff doesn't become clean just because a file gets opened. But he couldn't control the story anymore. That was the point. He couldn't keep painting me as the problem while hiding behind respectability and fake concern. He tried to ruin me by making me look unstable, careless, impossible to believe. In the end, I used the only thing he never thought I had: patience, proof, and the ability to keep going while he underestimated me. Seriously, that was all it took. Not rage, not revenge in the messy sense, just receipts, just truth arranged in order with no place left for him to hide. And when it was over, I didn't feel powerful in some movie way. I felt still. For the first time in a long time, I felt like the room belonged to me too.
Am I the asshole for ignoring my friend after she joked about my depression, which ended our friendship? I was already late because I'd spent 10 minutes standing in my room staring at my phone like it was some kind of bomb. Brooke had texted me 4 times before lunch, then again on the way there, then one more time when I was literally already in the cafeteria, and I still felt my stomach drop every single time her name lit up my screen. I used to answer her right away, always. I think I was scared that if I left even one message sitting there too long, she'd decide I was too much trouble and stop inviting me places. That sounds pathetic now. It probably was, but at the time it felt like survival. Sitting with Brooke and the others was the closest thing I had to being included, and I clung to it like a bad habit I couldn't quit. She was already there when I got to the table, spinning her fork around in her pasta and talking over everyone like usual. Brooke always did that thing where she made a room feel like it belonged to her. People laughed when she spoke. People waited for her reaction. I mostly just watched and tried to time my own words so I wouldn't interrupt. That day I was quiet, which honestly wasn't that different for me. I've had this thing for a long time where sometimes I go kind of blank and heavy inside, like every thought got wrapped in wet wool. I know how it looks from the outside. Lazy, rude, moody, dramatic. Brooke had used that word before like it was cute, like it was a joke everybody was in on except me. At lunch, one of the girls said something about me not talking much, and Brooke laughed and said, "She's only dramatic when she's doing that disappearing act. You know, when she acts like she's too depressed for us." She said it really lightly, smiling like it was nothing. Like it was one of those jokes you're supposed to push away with a little elbow and a fake groan. I remember feeling my face go hot and then cold, which is such a weird thing, but that's exactly what happened. My hands were under the table, clenched so tight my nails hurt. I tried to laugh, I really did. It came out wrong like air leaving a tire. Brooke looked at me and raised her eyebrows, waiting for me to play along. I couldn't. Something in me just stopped. I think that was the first time I realized I was tired, not just sad. Tired of being the one who made herself smaller so nobody else had to feel awkward. Tired of pretending my pain was some cute personality quirk people could comment on between bites of fries. So I said very quietly, "That's not funny." The whole table went weird, not silent exactly. Worse, that fake cheerful, uncomfortable weird where everyone suddenly becomes interested in their drink or their tray. Brooke's smile changed. You know that look people get when they're annoyed you made them responsible for your feelings? She rolled her eyes and said I was making things awkward on purpose. Like I'd chosen the exact second to become difficult. Like she hadn't just put my depression on display like it was a punchline. I didn't say anything after that. I just sat there feeling like my skin was too tight and my chest was caving in. The lunch period went on, but it felt like I was sitting outside my own body watching it happen. Brooke stopped talking to me for the rest of the meal. After school, she texted me asking why I had to be so sensitive and whether I was trying to embarrass her in front of everyone. I didn't answer. Not because I had some big brave plan. I just couldn't. My brain was buzzing and my throat kept tightening every time I opened the message. Then came the part that honestly hurt even more. The next day, people at school started acting different. Not everyone, but enough. Brooke had told them I was being cold lately, that I'd gotten impossible, that I was ignoring her for no reason. She said I'd turned into one of those people who make everything about themselves. I heard it from Nia first, who looked uncomfortable even saying it. She told me Brooke was upset because she felt like she'd done something wrong and I wouldn't talk to her. I nearly laughed at that, except there was nothing funny left in me. I wanted to explain. I wanted to say she didn't just joke, she hit the exact bruise I'd been trying to cover for months. I wanted to say I wasn't cold, I was trying not to fall apart in front of people who had already decided my pain was inconvenient. But once someone starts telling a story about you, it's like they've already written the ending. If you defend yourself, you sound defensive. If you stay quiet, they take that as proof. Great system. Really fair. Brooke kept texting. I didn't answer. Then she stopped texting and started telling people I had ghosted her after all she'd done for me. That was the sentence that made me feel sick, because I knew there were people who would believe her. I know what I look like when I'm overwhelmed. I know how easy it is for people to assume the quiet girl is guilty of something. Sometimes I think I practically hand people the wrong impression, because I'm so bad at taking up space in a way that feels normal. After a few days, she cornered me near the lockers and asked why I was acting like she'd murdered my family. She laughed when she said it, but her eyes were sharp. I remember staring at the metal floor and thinking how ridiculous I must have looked, standing there with my bag half open and my whole life feeling like it was made of paper. I told her I didn't think it was funny to joke about my depression. She said she was just kidding, and I was making her feel like a monster. Then she told me maybe I needed to lighten up if I wanted to keep friends. That was it. That was the sentence that snapped something, because suddenly I saw the whole shape of it. Every time I'd apologized for being quiet, every time I'd answered a text while I was shaking, every time I'd swallowed hurt so I wouldn't lose my place at the table, I wasn't being kept in the friendship. I was being managed by it. I walked away, seriously, just walked away while she was still talking. My legs were shaking so badly I thought I might trip, but I didn't stop. I didn't turn around, and after that, it was over. People asked questions. Brooke told her version. A few friends drifted away, and that part stung more than I want to admit because it confirmed what I'd always been afraid of, that I was only worth being around if I was easy, funny, low maintenance. Never sad for too long, never making anybody uncomfortable. But I'm done pretending that being hurt in silence is the same thing as being kind. Maybe I did lose my only person. Maybe I finally stopped begging to be tolerated. I still don't know which one hurts more.